Welcome to the Period Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Donovan, a registered dietitian and period recovery expert who has been where you are. This podcast is for the active, high-achieving woman who feels like she's doing everything right in her life, but her body isn't responding. Whether you've just discovered you have hypothalamic amenorrhea or you feel like you've already tried it all in regards to getting your period back and restoring your fertility, or you're on your journey to become a mom, you're in the right place. Here, we go beyond just getting your period back. We talk about fueling your body, regulating your nervous system, redefining your relationship with food and exercise, and stepping into the version of you that feels strong, feminine, and fully you. This is your safe space for honest conversations, expert guidance, and the deeper work that creates lasting change. So you can take the stress and the guess out, restore and keep your period and your fertility and your connection to yourself. Get ready to be inspired, get ready to feel seen, and finally get your period and life back. Let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I have a very unique guest today with me here. Her name is Betsy Brenner, and she has an amazing story of being a D1 collegiate tennis player. And though she never struggled with a diagnosable eating disorder when she was younger, she ended up developing this eating disorder midlife. And Betsy takes us through her entire lifespan of how she felt as an athlete, what things were so normalized actually weren't normalized, like earning and burning her food, and how this process of being an athlete, growing up, being a perfectionist, molded her into the amazing woman she is today. And I think this is important for any mom out there that is already a mom, or any daughters or women out there, to listen to this together, because this is just such a beautiful story of a woman who was an athlete, still was an athlete, didn't think she was an athlete, and all the things that Betsy had growing up that molded her into the athlete and perfectionist that later drove her to this eating disorder. So Betsy is an amazing author, and she's going to share her book as well. And I'm just so excited for you to meet Betsy. So let's dive in and connect. Hello, Betsy, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so excited you're here too. It took a little time logistically to schedule, but that's okay. That's the crazy world we live in. Everybody's so busy, and schedules are limited. And I know for me right now, I have two young boys that are coming home for summer, and yes,
that changes everything. I'm sure.
It's starting to get a little bit crazy. And Betsy and I aren't too far away from each other on the East Coast, Rhode Island, and I'm in New York. So we were just talking pre-show and saying how maybe sometime in the near future, because she's out near my way, that we might be able to meet in real life, IRL. I think that's IRL, in real life. Yes.
I like that. I've never heard that acronym.
That's the acronym. Yep. IRL.
Well,
so I met Betsy virtually, kind of met. It was behind the scenes. I was taking a continuing education unit because as a registered dietitian, in order to keep my credentials, I always have to keep up with continuing education to make sure I'm staying abreast of what I'm doing and how I'm serving you guys across the world. So I met Betsy through a webinar, and it was called, Betsy, and help me out with this, The Athlete's Body Always Remembers, right? And it was you as a co-speaker with Dr.
Kate Cragen from Montenegro.
Okay.
And the gist of it was that once an athlete, always an athlete, and that when clinicians are facing, I'll say women in midlife, it could be anyone in midlife, the fact that they have been an athlete or are still an athlete is something that needs to be taken into consideration, even if at their current stage in life, they're no longer participating in high-level athletics.
Yeah, which is what we're going to kind of talk about today. Not the exact webinar, but we're going to talk about athletes, eating disorders, identity around movement, and all the things. And Betsy has an amazing story to share with you all. And I'm going to give her literally the microphone in a moment for her to share story, and then we're going to maybe go into some questions that I have for her that I think will resonate with you guys. And when we're talking about athletes here, I know Betsy, you played, what sport did you play? Was it tennis?
Tennis, yes.
Okay, I remember tennis. Okay. So regardless if you played collegiate, high school, past collegiate, club, whatever it may be, but also I want you to consider the fact of this as well, that because maybe you don't play a specific sport like tennis, like I never played specific sports. If you count cheerleading and dance as sport, yes, I guess I played a sport, but I never played a sport. But when I was diagnosed with hypothalamic amenorrhea, I was just like, no, this does not make any sense because I'm not an athlete. I am, regular body weight, blah, 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 all the things. But here's the thing. You may not consider yourself an athlete, but you may be moving just as much as an athlete, if not more than an athlete. So I'm saying this is for the collegiate, high school, etc. athlete, but also the athlete that doesn't know she's an athlete. So I'm going to let you take it away, Betsy, and share your story today.
Well, my story will take longer than the time we have. So there's been a lot of chapters, but I'll do my best to summarize it. I'm the author of my own memoir, which I wrote during the pandemic. It's called The Longest Match: Rallying to Defeat an Eating Disorder in Midlife. I do identify as an athlete, and that was a very important factor in developing an eating disorder in midlife. As a result of being an athlete, my eating and relationship with food and movement was certainly disordered for many years. But as an athlete, I thought that was normal. And so that's why it's a very important part of my story. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and I went on to play D1 college tennis for 4 years at Brown University. Tennis was a huge part of my life, competing all around the country and then at the highest college level, or D1 college level. And what contributed to developing an eating disorder in midlife was, even though I hadn't played for 20 something years, I got back into tennis in my 40s and became very fit and muscular and started competing again. And once again, that athletic mindset, that once an athlete, always an athlete, just completely took hold. I loved all the positive comments. Wow, you're a great tennis player. You're so fit. You're so muscular. And it brought back everything from my past. And tennis was a tremendous source of self-esteem. Growing up in Rochester and then later on a greater level, I was known for my tennis and made me feel good about myself. It was something I was good at. So when I got back into tennis in my 40s and started getting all these positive comments, not only was it great for me personally and my tennis, it led to my coaching career and all that. But as a result, I developed this intense fear of gaining weight, because at the same time I was diagnosed with a serious chronic illness, serious asthma. And when asthma kept me off the court, I started restricting my food intake because I couldn't play tennis. I was scared I would gain weight. So it really brought to a head so much that was ingrained in me from a pre-adolescent age about always having to play tennis. Always, and even when I wasn't competing in tennis, I would run. There was always this compensatory exercise for what I ate, even when I wasn't competing at a high level of tennis, even when I didn't have a diagnosable eating disorder. So
Can I interrupt you just for a moment?
Of course.
Because I have some really important questions that I want to know. This weight gain thing, right? It's a big thing, right? Now, was this weight gain ever a fear of yours? Did this ever come up in your late teens, early 20s, or?
It didn't come up. I was always very small for my age, very petite, but I was a really good tennis player. Weight was not an issue. It was more like I wish I were bigger and stronger, but I was very petite, but did really well with that. The fear of weight gain came when asthma kept me off the court in my 40s, when tennis had just become a very big part of my life. But what the point I was trying to make is that throughout, even when I wasn't competing in tennis, I had a very disordered relationship with food and movement. I had to exercise to give myself permission to eat what I wanted to eat, even when I wasn't struggling with a diagnosable eating disorder. And I just thought it was that way because I was an athlete.
Yeah. And we develop this, like, I think for a lot of women or people in general, really, is that when you're that young, late teens, early 20s, we may not wait, might not even be a thing because it's like, well, you're so active, you're eating so much, you're not even thinking about it. You're
Hmm.
just doing the activity, you're doing that. And then there comes a time where maybe we're not so active anymore. And it sounds like for you, it was never really, it was an issue, but it really wasn't an issue until you got a little bit older. And I wanted to know, even before that came to fruition, as you got into your midlife, did you have a regular menstrual cycle when you were competing when you were younger?
I did. I will say I always did. And when I was diagnosed with my eating disorder, fortunately, I was headed down a very dangerous path. So I may have ended up losing it, but fortunately, I got help before it got to that point.
Okay. Okay. And I don't know if you remember at any point, Betsy, that cycles became longer or lighter or any of that. Because sometimes if we don't really pay attention to our menstrual cycle, or we haven't, most of women have not been taught about their menstrual cycle much. It's like, oh, you get a period every month, or, your mom tells you when you get a certain age, oh, by the way, you're going to get a period,
Right.
But from that, I mean, I didn't know anything about my menstrual cycle until I wanted to have kids. So, and do you remember that at all, or was it kind of hard to say that because maybe you
All
weren't?
I all I remember is it was always very irregular. It was
Okay.
never regular. Sometimes it would be much longer, more often longer than shorter. I'd get really, really severe cramps, but it was very unpredictable. And the worst timing was if I was on the first day and I had a big match. In fact, I played the biggest national junior tennis tournament of my life when I was 17 and was bowled over in severe cramps.
Mm,
So it definitely had an impact,
yes.
but it was very unpredictable.
Yes.
Unpredictable.
Which I want to say we see a lot in athletes that they're like, okay, well, I'm still getting a menstrual cycle. And it's like, okay, well, okay, cool. But are you getting it regularly every month? Is it predictable? Are you ovulating? And most will say, no, it's irregular. And that is what I like to say is, I don't want to say the precursor, but a lot of times periods will go irregular, shorter, lighter,
Mhm.
more, across the span of a few months versus every month before they actually go missing.
Mhm.
And then also, I just want to say there's athletes out there that never lose their periods despite them being super, super active and maybe not fueling adequately. So I just
That
want to
was
point,
me. That was
yes.
definitely me.
So and I also don't want to say like, oh, well, if you didn't lose your period, you're fine. You're fine.
It's so much more than that. Yes.
Yes. So, anyways, I had to stop you there and then also ask one more thing about where I mean, who doesn't love to be validated, like about their body? And I'm not saying like now, it's probably different for you now. It's different for me. If someone talks about my body, I ask them not to, whether it's a good or a bad or bad comment. But when you were midlife, I mean, I just turned 40 this past year. And I'm starting to get to a point where it's like, I'm not in my 20s anymore. You're seeing fine lines, you're seeing this, that. How, did that feel for you to like get all those compliments at that age?
It felt great because I had returned to something that I had previously been known for and was very good at. So when all of a sudden it came back as an important part of my life, I was competing successfully. I was coaching. It was noticed. I'd gone 20 something years without competing in tennis. I went to law school, got married, had 3 kids. Life was busy. It was still busy when I got back into tennis. And that it just took over that sense of self-esteem and the identity as a tennis player, as an athlete, as a coach. But it really helped bring to a head all that disordered eating and relationship with food and exercise. Otherwise, it probably would have just continued as something that was disordered. And I'll give you a quick example. When I was preparing to write my memoir, I reread all these old diaries and journals I had kept. And even in law school, when I was not playing any tennis, I was focused on law school, not focused on my career as a tennis player. I wrote in one of my diaries that my boyfriend wanted to have pizza that night. And I was struggling with the idea of having pizza because I hadn't worked out that day. And that was in my 20s that just shows that once an athlete, always an athlete. And that athletic mindset about always having to be fit and in shape and connecting, eating pizza with whether I worked out or not. And it wasn't until I learned in my recovery in my 40s and early 50s that food is food and our bodies don't have to move every day and engage in exercise to be able to eat the foods we enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's so normalized whether you're kind of an athlete or not, right? That, "Oh, well, I gotta earn this pizza or I gotta
Yes.
burn this pizza or I gotta, I got 3 graduation parties coming up this weekend and I know there's gonna be all these different foods. Well, I better get really hard workouts in or, make sure that that happens." And the thing is, like, if you probably go to your doctor and said, "Yeah, I'm, burning all this food off." And they probably would be like, "Great job." Like, "Oh, you're really healthy. Keep going." Right? Was there
Absolutely. It's normalized in our society, and that just drives the proliferation of eating disorders.
Yes, it is so multifaceted from so many different layers in our life, doctors, parents, etc. And speaking of, like, growing up as an athlete, Betsy, was there ever any pressure from like parents, coaches? Because I have heard actually my sister-in-law, she was a Syracuse University cheerleader, and that's when her eating disorder started because her coach said to her, it looks like you're gaining a little bit of weight.
Mm,
And, we have these crop tops and after that it
mm.
was, and I'm sure it was more than just that little moment, right? It doesn't just happen over one moment. But yeah, so I'm curious how, like, growing up, if there was any influence in how these behaviors were eventually cultivated.
That's really interesting what you said, and yes, that happens all the time. An innocent remark can lead to an eating disorder. Like you said, it's more complex than that. There's usually underlying mental health issues like anxiety, but all it can take is one comment like that to really push the eating disorder forward. But for me, when I was growing up, there wasn't the same pressure there is today to look a certain way or for my body to be a certain way. Like I said, I was always very small for my age, but the pressure was intense. And I grew up in a home where the pressure was subtle, but I felt like I had to be perfect. I had to be the perfect tennis player, the perfect student. It drove this intense fear of failure. My mom expected certain things, and it wasn't always outwardly, it was subtle at times. But I felt like a failure if I lost a tennis match I could have won, or if I brought home a grade that wasn't up to my usual standards. I had these unrealistic expectations of perfection. And many people who develop eating disorders have these certain personality traits. I have to be perfect. There's no place for being imperfect or vulnerable. And that's how I was raised. Being strong meant always being positive and successful. There was no place for vulnerability or negative feelings and emotions. And if you go long enough, as I did decades with feeling like I had to be perfect and internalizing anything negative, eventually it's going to come out in some maladaptive way of coping. So tennis, which gave me so many gifts and experiences and opportunities, also was at play beneath the surface, driving that need to be perfect.
Yeah, yeah. And do you feel like, Betsy, because those are such important points, because this doesn't just happen. Like, all these things don't just happen. Eating disorders don't just happen. And I'm not saying it's like those women out there. I'm not saying it's your parents' fault, or your coach's fault that this has happened. It's very, very layered, if you will.
Yes.
But do you think for you, Betsy, that time where things kind of exploded, if you will, happened midlife, after the career, after the kids?
It definitely did. That's when it all came to a head in my 40s with the combination of being diagnosed with moderate to severe asthma at a time when I'd just gotten back into competitive tennis. Without either one of those, we'll never know if my eating disorder would have been diagnosed, but it was always disordered. And it was always this very strong, unhealthy connection between what I ate, how much I ate, and whether I exercised and how much, even when I wasn't competing on the tennis court. I thought in law school that I ran just for stress release. I also ran for the exercise piece because I was always used to doing some kind of vigorous exercise. And even after having kids, and I had twins, it was like, I need to get back in shape. So it's like, let's get out there walking as soon as I can. But I think as we age, and especially having been an athlete, sometimes women, and I hear from women around the world who struggle in midlife, become very uncomfortable with the inevitable changes that aging brings. Our bodies are supposed to change. They do change. And too often these eating disorders develop in midlife as a way to try and prevent the natural process of aging. And so much of recovery is learning to embrace those changes and realize that it's a privilege to grow older. My parents both died of cancer very young. I've already outlived both of them, and it is a privilege to grow old. And with that comes accepting that we can't, in our 50s, 60s, we shouldn't be trying to look like we did in our 20s or
Yeah.
30s or
Yeah.
teens.
Or even in your 40s,
Yes,
or
exactly.
your 30s, really,
Right. Right. There's so much focus on, the changes at puberty, but what about the changes around
Yeah.
perimenopause and menopause and all these things that people try and hold on to this youth or whatever's been ingrained in them and society perpetuates. But instead, the reality is we get to age if we're fortunate and our bodies are going to change. And it's okay, even though it's very, very hard for many women to adapt to those changes and accept them.
Yes, it absolutely is. And in a world where we live in that is so image focused, it's like we lose sight when we focus on these external things. We really lose sight of what is internal and who we really are as women. And I'm sure you can, I don't want to say thank your eating disorder, but in a way, it's like if that didn't come to fruition, would you have, would you have gone until you were 90 in the nursing home being, one of your kids come in like, hey, mom, I brought you cake for your 90th birthday. I didn't get a run in today, or I didn't walk around the, and I'm not saying your kids are going to put you in a nursing home, Betsy, but,
No, I the point you're making is absolutely real. And like I said, if I just been diagnosed with moderate to severe asthma and had not just gotten into tennis, perhaps I wouldn't have developed this intense fear of weight gain. And if I hadn't had the asthma serious flare ups keep me off the tennis court when I just started competing again, I may never have developed this intense fear of weight gain. And it may have remained just not simply, but it may have remained this disordered relationship so that, yes, that 90 cake may have been an issue instead of, wow, I get to turn 90. I'm going to enjoy the biggest piece of cake I can eat and it's okay. And actually, we can enjoy that piece of cake at any age and even on days when we haven't moved our body in any way. And that was a huge piece for me of my recovery was learning to take days off from any movement whatsoever and still nourish my body and fuel it properly just so my organs could function. Even
yeah.
when you're laying on a couch, our organs need fuel to function properly, totally separate from whether we've even gone for a walk or not.
Yes, 100%. And I like to say, let's look at our bodies as not just like a day to day, like we don't hit a reset button like every 24 hours. Like, this is collective. Our body is looking at collective energy, intake, loss, movement. And for those that have struggled with symptoms of an eating disorder, if it's not a missing period, but maybe it's poor digestion, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's bad sleep, like your body is in like what I like to call it, Betsy, is like this negative bank account.
Hmm.
And we need to get out of debt. And so we have to think of not only our body as, a collective, like, let's just say over a 3 months time period, just using that as an example, versus like, oh, this is what I did today. This is what I didn't do today. This is what I ate today. So yeah, we don't hit a reset button every 24 hours. But I do want to ask, Betsy, how did you move through that? How did you get through the fact that it is okay to still eat maybe even more than you would eat on the days that you didn't even work out?
It was a difficult process. A physician of mine noticed the weight loss. This was in my 40s and suggested I see a dietitian. And it was at the very first appointment with my dietitian that I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was in my 40s. Complete denial. How could I have an eating disorder? I'm in my 40s. I eat. So I had a lot to learn. But anyway, it was with my dietitian that I worked very hard on learning what my body needed. And everybody's body is different. Like I said, I'm a very small person, but my body still needs sufficient fuel just to function. And I'd been so programmed to exercise vigorously many days a week, barely taking days off unless I was forced to. And then on those days when I didn't, that's when the eating disorder really took hold. I better restrict. So it was with my dietitian first through meal plans to restore the weight, but taking it even beyond that, understanding the needs that my body had. And it usually begins with a meal plan. And for me, one of the hardest things was learning to take days off and still follow the meal plan. And then learning to take 2 days off. And it was a process probably over 6 or 7 years at least. And, I had some experiences along the way that I can see the progress that I made, experiences along the way where that became harder, and experiences along the way which really helped me and propelled my recovery forward. And I write about those in detail in my book. And but it was really my dietitian and then referral to a therapist who specialized in eating disorders. Because with eating disorders, it's not about the food; it's the behaviors with food and exercise that are the symptoms of what's going on underneath. And so when I first learned that my eating disorder wasn't about the food, I was like, wait, what? How can
Yeah.
that be?
But
And
eating
so
is in the word. Like it's
exactly. So it was with my therapist over many years, learning how and why my eating disorder developed and what would be necessary for recovery, and understanding myself in a way I had never understood how the experiences I went through impacted me in my life. And one huge thing was that my anxiety wasn't diagnosed till I was in my 40s with the diagnosis of asthma. It goes back to my young childhood. So my eating disorder and hitting a tennis ball became ways of coping with anxiety. Growing up, the only way of coping I had was hitting a tennis ball. It was the only outlet I had. And fortunately, I could hit it pretty well. So it worked.
Yeah.
But that's not getting really at the core, at the source.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned that too, Betsy, because I think it is also a normalized thing is that we use exercise or sport or whatever means of movement as our anxiety relief, our stress relief. And it's just normalized. But if that's your only tool in your toolbox of stress relief, like there's a time and a place to be like, all right, it's been a long day. I've been sitting inside all day. I'm going to go for a run. Now, if you have a missing period or, a undiagnosed or diagnosed eating disorder and other signs of REDS or low energy availability, like, no, that should not be your first choice. And probably not a choice at the current time. There may be a time, again, you can say, all right, I'm going to go for a run. I'm stressed, but also that you're probably doing baseline things to keep that stress underway, or you have other tools in your toolbox to be able to combat stress. Because I know for me, Betsy, I was very, very type A. I still have some type A tendencies, but I try to say, like, I'm trying to use those for like good things, staying organized with work and kids' schedules and so forth. So I remember I was a dietitian and that was a thing for me. That was a big identity piece where it's like, well, I'm a dietitian and I have to, look the part, and I would work all day, 8, 9 hours. Prior to going to work, I would do a 1 to 2 hour workout.
Mm,
And then I would come home and I would run 3 miles for my stress. Oh, it was a stressful day at work. It's my
wow.
stress relief. And, looking back, it's like I was just, stressing my body out more because what happens is when you are in low energy availability, whether you have an eating disorder, disordered eating, REDS, your body is looking at that exercise that gives us a really nice dopamine hit,
Yes.
but it's looking at it as stress, adrenaline,
Mhm.
cortisol. Your body is literally looking at that run. And I don't mean to scare anyone of like, oh my gosh, like now I can't run anymore. Well, if your period's missing and you haven't eaten, just like we got to check in here. We have to check
Yes.
in here. But our body's looking at it as stress. You just can't see it. it is kind of invisible, if you will. But it's actually, causing harm to your body right now because it's in an energy deficit. So I think that's another thing that's normalized. And I think, athletes or people that don't think they're athletes but are working out like athletes need to know that stress relief, that can't be the only form. But I also like to say, Betsy, when you were that young, I mean, how did you know any better?
I
You know?
certainly didn't. I certainly didn't. And that pressure to succeed, there was no talk about the anxiety. There was no talk about relieving stress. It was just, I also had that type A personality. It was programmed. We study, we play tennis, we do as well as we possibly can, which sometimes it felt like it was never good enough because there were these expectations of perfection, which should never be the goal. We're all imperfect, we're all human. In fact, I didn't even learn till my recovery journey that it's okay to be human. Imagine that. If I'd been told as a child that it's okay to make mistakes, you don't have to win every tennis match. Even the best players in the world have bad days on the tennis court. But I just always had this strive for as close to perfection as I could, and anything less felt like I wasn't good enough.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that because it's a big part of it's a huge part of perfectionism, not feeling good enough, not feeling seen, not feeling loved. I can go on and on about perfectionism. And there's actually a book. Do I have it up here? No, I think it might be in the other room. But Brene Brown has a book called The Gifts of Imperfection.
Yes,
And
yes.
have you read it before, Betsy?
Yes, and I
Yes.
have one of her quotes in the beginning of my book,
You
actually.
do?
I do. I love her work.
I
And
do
the
too.
word that comes to mind is vulnerability. And growing up, that was always equated with
Yeah.
weakness. And I didn't learn until my recovery that not only was vulnerability okay, it was necessary for full
Yes.
recovery to allow
Essential.
in vulnerability. Absolutely.
Yes.
But that goes against everything that was ingrained in me from a
Yeah.
very young age.
Yes. And we have a lot of, reprogramming that we have to do from being children, even if our family life looked maybe cookie cutter, mom, dad, working, brothers, sisters, house, dog, all the like the things that we, I guess, think family is supposed to look like. And, everyone has some inner child work or inner healing to do. And
Certainly.
yes. And I think, thinking about that vulnerability, I have to tell many of my clients, like, it's okay to cry. Like crying is good. Like, let's
Right.
cry, give yourself the permission. But many, I think, Betsy, even though majority of the women I work with are probably early 20s, maybe mid 30s, but I have some outliers of younger women and older women. And across the board, perfectionism, and a lot of them, have grown up in places where parents had these idealistic views of being perfect, getting good grades
Mhm.
and sports and all the things. So I'm curious. I know you said it was midlife where you kind of learned that it's okay to be vulnerable and, feel your feelings. How do you think your experience, whether the good parts or the bad parts, has molded or supported your kids? Or is there anything you would do differently? And I guess you tell me where you want to go with it and how you want to answer it. But do you feel like, if I don't want to say if you could go back in time, anything different, but how do you feel what you were going through maybe impacted your children
Mhm.
when they were younger? So
Well, that's
any
a
of
good,
those, I asked like three questions. So
yes.
you go
That's
where you want with it.
That's a good question, and I get asked that all the time. The last line of my memoir is my own quote, and it's never too late to be a work in progress.
Mm,
And by that I mean, obviously it's never too late. We can heal at any age and become healthier in mind, body, and spirit. But what's most importantly here is we're always a work in progress, and I feel it was the same way for me as a mom. I have 3 children. When my older daughter was in high school, was at the height of when I was struggling with my eating disorder. We were both struggling with yet to be diagnosed anxiety, and it was really, really hard. My twins are 8 years younger, and I think by the time they were growing up, I was in better touch with myself and understood myself better. And the point is, we do the best we can with what we know at the time. And through years of working with my therapist and the dietitian, I came to understand myself and how and why the eating disorder developed, what would be necessary for recovery. But I think we're always a work in progress. There's no finish line, there's no
Yeah.
definitive moment where, okay, I'm healed. It's whatever we're struggling with, it's something we need to manage for the rest of our lives. So I think with my own children, with my own family, I continue to be a work in progress. And as I became healthier in mind, body, and spirit, I hopefully became a better mother. And I'd like to think that I always tried to keep the lines of communication open and let them know that, while we always want you to do your best, you're human and we're not going to have unrealistic or unnecessary expectations, and also letting our children know that it's okay to talk about feelings and it's okay to talk about negative feelings and emotions and express them, something that I was never allowed to do. My mom modeled after my parents divorced when I was a young child, here a traumatic event, she went on as if nothing happened. So that's what was modeled for me at a young age, that when
Mm.
something bad happens, we just stuff all the feelings inside and we just keep going. We're strong, never vulnerable. And I'd like to think I did it differently with my own children, comforting them when things didn't go well, but not enabling them and teaching them important life lessons that difficult experiences happen, we can learn from them, we can talk about them, and that if they make a mistake or get a bad grade or lose a sports event, whatever it is, they are loved unconditionally. And I think that's what it comes down to, because even though I know my mom loved me, I often felt like I had to earn that love, like it was conditioned on my success. Whereas I think the most important thing, and I hope I've done it, is that all three of my children, who are now all adults,
Mhm.
feel that the love was unconditional.
Yeah. Yeah. No matter what. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a beautiful takeaway because, there's so many moms out there that are trying to do the best that they can. And I think you said, can't remember exactly what you said, Betsy, but it reminded me of a saying that I share often. And it's, you only know what you know when you know it. Right.
Yes.
And then when you know better, you can start to do differently.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's part of that work in progress. I learned so
Yes.
much as I was going on, and I was certainly a mom throughout all that time. So hopefully, being that work in progress, I was able to be a better mom. So, they're not on this podcast to answer that question, but
Yeah.
I believe that all three of my children know that they have been loved unconditionally through
Yes.
all the periods of their life, through the good times and the hard times.
Yes.
And nobody
Yes.
gets through this life without going through difficult experiences. And, I hear from women around the world, literally my emails in the back of my book. And I think the reason so many people can relate to my story is because it's hardly extraordinary. It's because my story is quite ordinary that so many people can relate to it.
Yes, I would absolutely agree because it is so it's so common. It's more common than it probably should be, but it is what it is, right? This is the world we live in and have lived in, and having disordered eating or just a not great relationship with our bodies and our exercise and food, like it's so layered.
It's a way of
And
coping. It's
yeah.
basically a
Well,
way
yeah,
of
we can
coping with life.
control, right? There's not many things you can control in life, right? But
Yes.
we can control what we put in our mouth. We can control how hard we work out or when we work out, right? So
Right.
aside from that, there's really not many other things.
And
And
as a child with that anxiety, I felt this intense need to be in control at all times.
yeah.
So when life felt out of control, I was more likely to engage in the disordered eating and overexercise as a way to feel in control.
Yes, and it's a safety mechanism,
Absolutely.
for that. Even though it's not technically making our body safe, but it feels familiar, it feels safe to the brain because it feels a little bit more predictable. And brains do not like unpredictability. They just don't, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. So, but I really appreciate you sharing the input on, your kids and being a mom, because I know there are so many women out there that are moms and have kids. And I've actually have had many young women come to me and share how their mom has an eating disorder or disordered eating. And they struggle because they're like, but I want, like, I'm getting the help and I want mom want mom to get the help. I want her to, and, I try to remind them that, mom's journey is mom's journey. This is their journey. And hopefully by you doing this work, mom is going to see it and maybe she will, see and
Yes.
modeling.
It's very important that we model a healthy relationship with food and movement for our own children because they're like sponges. They pick up on everything.
Yes, they do. Cause I remember for me, my mom would never be like, Cynthia, like you need to count your calories or you need to burn that off or you can't eat this, you can't eat that. But I saw her counting the calories. I saw her
Yes.
earning and burning. She'd let me have cake for breakfast. So she was very lax, but at the same time, like I saw her doing
Oh,
that.
yes. Yes. And it wasn't until I went back to write my memoir that I really realized how many things my mom said that were so disordered, things about bragging about how little she weighed on her wedding day or that eating fat was bad and it would have make her breast cancer come back and all these messages that came across that somehow we have to be thin or fat is bad or just these messages around food, and kids are sponges, they take it all in.
Yes. And I also want to say, don't beat yourself up about this. If you're listening to this and you're a kid, you're like, oh my God, my kids, you are a work in progress, right,
Yes.
Betsy?
Absolutely.
So
It's never
you're,
too late to be a work
no,
in progress.
no, not at all. So I want to know if there's anything that you feel compelled to share more about your experience or that you just wish more women knew. And then we'll talk a little bit more and close things out.
Well, I'll tell you the word that comes to mind and guides my life now is freedom. And I never planned to write a book. I was a very, very private person. I started writing for the sole purpose of healing on the deepest level possible. The pandemic gave me the gift of time to write my entire manuscript in 10 months. And it was several months into the process where I was told, you may have something here that could help people. But the reality was, I had barely ever told anybody that I struggled with an eating disorder. And when I did, I made it sound like it was something way in the past. So to be so vulnerable and share my story with the world, it goes against how I always viewed myself. I was very private. I always had a lot of friends, but I let very few people in. And the freedom that comes from putting my story out there impacts my life in profound ways. I've found my voice. I don't worry about what other people think. I can be vulnerable. I can live my life authentically. And those are all gifts of my own recovery. And you mentioned Brene Brown, and the quote I use in my book comes from her gifts of imperfection. And I think this quote really, really sums it up. This is Brene Brown's quote from The Gifts of Imperfection. Owning our stories and loving ourselves through the process is the bravest thing we'll ever do. And my memoir was published in 2021. I never envision any of the work I do now. I am a peer mentor. I lead peer support groups. I travel and speak around the country. I speak to women's groups, clinician groups, treatment centers, eating disorder conferences, athlete mental health groups. And none of this would have been possible if I hadn't shared my story. Again, a story that's very ordinary, hardly extraordinary, but every day I embrace the freedom that has come from what I've done.
Yes. Well, I think, Betsy, your story is very extraordinary because it is so hard to be so vulnerable, and share your story. But like you said, the gifts that come out of doing the hard, vulnerable thing are just, like you said, you could have never imagined. I could have never imagined that I'd be sitting here recording my, I don't know, 100 and something episode of my podcast and serving women across the world, never, ever, but that was also a gift for me, that came out of that. And other gifts, my children, being able to teach my kids about vulnerability, to have them have a good relationship with food, to be able to be an athlete at 40 and probably stronger than I was when I'm 20 because I take care of myself better now,
Yes.
so many gifts. And I think initially it is scary because it's the unknown. It's like, well, if I start to gain weight or if I do this thing, like what's going to happen? And, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say exactly what will happen, but what I can tell you is based on so many women that I've supported, probably so many women that you've seen, Betsy, like the gifts of doing this are just, it's the gift that keeps on giving,
It is.
right?
And it's so gratifying to see people go from struggling on a deep level to being able to eventually share their own stories of recovery and give back in their
Yeah.
lives.
Yes, no greater feeling. So, and together, us sharing our story, and it took me a while to share my story too, Betsy. But if we are able to share our stories when we're ready, we have
Yes.
no idea who we can impact. So I thank you so much. So I want to know for you, Betsy, you have a book. What is the book's name, and where can people find it if they wanted to grab it?
Sure. My book is called The Longest Match: Rallying to Defeat an Eating Disorder in Midlife. It is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all sorts of websites. It's on the bookshelves in local bookstores here in Rhode Island. My website is www.betsybrenner.com. It's also available on my website, as well as there's information about my peer mentorship, my groups, and everything you need to know is on my website. My Instagram is at Betsy Brenner Author. That's where I share a lot of my work, my travel, my speaking, my groups that I offer. But my book is also available on my website. And I receive emails from women around the world almost on a weekly basis. I respond to every single one, at least to offer resources and support.
Amazing, Betsy. Thank you. And all this will be included in the show notes. And I just want to share one last thing before we wrap up is I think this is an important thing to know because period loss, red S, eating disorders, HA, disordered eating, et cetera, they don't ever start because we hate our bodies, right? They start a lot of times because we're just trying to be healthy. We're just trying to do the right thing. We're trying to be successful, disciplined, and good. And so I think that's important to know after all of our discussion. And Betsy, if there's anything else you want to leave with, if not, we'll wrap up.
Yes, no, I think everything you said is so important. And also the fact that we have to work on this healthier relationship with food and body and movement in a society that is telling us our bodies have to look a certain way. So it's almost like we have to put blinders on to social media and everything that's out there to know that we can be that work in progress and redefine what healthy relationship means with ourselves and our bodies.
Yes, yes, well said. Thank you again so much, Betsy, for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
To all the amazing women out there, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Take a moment to reflect on what resonated and how you can start applying it to your own recovery journey. I truly want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here and listening to the podcast. I know there are so many podcasts and resources out there, and it means the world to me that you're choosing to spend this time with me. If you're looking for more support on your recovery journey, visit my website, periodnutritionist.com. And if this episode supported you, it would mean the world to me, again, if you just subscribed, left a review, or shared it with another woman who needs to hear this. The more we talk about missing periods, infertility, the more women we could support. Are you ready to get your period back and step into the woman you were meant to be? I'll see you in 2 weeks.